Mark, you have written a book on ultra endurance cycling. I mean, literally, there is one available in the GCN shop. Well worth a read. But what I mean is that you have set records that no one else can touch. I want to find out some of your secrets, because more and more people are taking to ultra cycling, aren't they? So let's start with training first of all. How do you train for something as bonkers as ultra cycling?
Well, I mean, the word bonkers in the question is quite a useful place to start, because I guess for anyone to get their head around ultra endurance riding, whether it's an organised event or a big expedition ride, you do need to somehow normalise it. I know that sounds weird, but you do need to have something in your repertoire which makes you sort of be able to understand those distances based on your discipline. Physical fitness is two things, isn't it? It's clearly the strength, the muscular strength, you know, the tendons, all the sporting work. But when you get tired, when you push into bigger hours and days and maybe even weeks, it's about conditioning. And people forget about that stuff. That's about your neural system. That's about your backside. That's about your neck. That's about your hands. It's about all the stuff that happens as you put yourself through much, much bigger distances and days. So you get these really, really fit riders, fast riders, but they're kind of used up in an hour or two. Whereas clearly the fitness that you're trying to build for ultra endurance is a lot of conditioning, genuinely being able to endure and understanding how your body changes when you go through big hours on the bike. We all have sort of physical tics, like my right knee comes out, you know, I start riding like this. Some people, they become very A-framed on the bike, so their shoulders come up, they lock out their elbows. Just being very conscious of how you tire on the bike and how to counter that. So, you know, the physical training can only be put to good use when you're out there if you can stay relaxed on the bike, you know, nice and neutral, keep a high cadence, keep good body separation, all that good stuff. The wonderful thing about endurance and ultra endurance is anyone can do it. So we can't all be hill sprint champions, we can't all be track racers, but look at those who have achieved, you know, inspiring things in the ultra endurance world. The guys and the girls that are good at this, there's no commonality in terms of body shape, age, background. And I think that's the wonderful thing about ultra endurance. If you have the passion and the want to push big distances, you first of all got to be able to look yourself in the mirror and go, that's me, I can do that. So never look at anyone, myself included, and go, but he's that sort of person, so I couldn't possibly do it. I'm a big lump of a rider. I'm really tall, I'm over 90 kilos, and I think it's really, really important to say that. If you have the passion and the want to push big distances, anyone can. You just need to figure out how you train a little bit differently and all the other bits.
Yeah, that is a really interesting point, actually. There is a high rate of attrition in ultra events, isn't there? And partly that's because they're super hard. That's the whole point of it. But you don't strike me as someone who quits. I can't think of a time when you've done something on a bike and you haven't finished it. But how do you push through those really dark times? Because they happen. That's part of ultra cycling.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the physicality of ultra endurance cycling is a battle of attrition. You know, your body is going to hurt, you know, and I think you learn to be self-aware in terms of like what's being sore and what's injured. So you become very, like, the more that you do it, the more you get used to, like, okay, I've been here before, I can ride through that. So having that kind of confidence is useful because you're going to put yourself into a place riding ultra endurance where you're learning stuff about your body that you would never learn in a short race. When you're doing multi-day, multi-week, multi-month stuff like I've done, it's a massive psychological roller coaster. And also you've got to be quite good in your own company. You've got to be comfortable in your own head. It's not like a club ride where the miles go by because you're chatting to your mate. Often you're alone. It's a race against yourself. Ultra endurance is ultimately a massive time trial. So the only person you are racing is yourself, and being comfortable in your own head, you know, I mean, I know it's a bit glib and a bit obvious, but don't focus on the finish. It's so hard when you're having a tough time in a ride and the finish is like hundreds or thousands, or in my case, sometimes tens of thousands of miles away, to be motivated by the end, because it's just not something that's even over the next horizon. It's just so intimidating. So I could say really obvious things like just ride the road in front of you. Just ride the road in front of you. Most people quit big ultra events, not because they can't do it, but because at some point, the idea of continuing to do what they're doing sort of overwhelms them.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think practically they could if they get the nutrition right and, you know, keep riding consistently. But it is very much the psychology. Do you have the ability to focus on what you need to do now so the big picture kind of takes care of itself?
So is that what you do then? You just focus on the there and now, just try and put your demons back in a box.
You do, absolutely you do. You just ride the road in front of you. But you've also got to accept that there's moments where you'll be top of the world. You'll feel brilliant. And it might be a view, it might be something you've just eaten, a sugar rush, whatever's caused it, but you just feel top dollar, big tailwind. When you're in that position, understand that it's not going to continue to be that way. And conversely, when like you're rock bottom, you know, say it's the middle of the night, you get the sleepies, you can barely keep your eyes open, and you just want to stop. Nothing is constant. Nothing is constant. So there's this assumption from people who've not ridden ultras that if I'm tired and I don't stop and sleep, I'll get more tired. Logical. If I'm sore and I keep doing what I'm doing, I'm going to get more sore. That logically makes sense. It's not true. It's not true. The mind and the body has this incredible ability to rebound. What you need to do is trust it. Trust the mind and body, and don't try and override it. Don't try and overthink it. Don't try and be too hard on yourself. Be kind on yourself on a ride. Realize that you can't be like super intense, focused on the numbers, racing all the time. You need to relax. You need to let the psychological roller coaster happen. If you're feeling rock bottom, keep riding. You'll feel better. If you're feeling top of the world, bad news. It's going to get worse. But just know that flux will happen. That will change. And when you're in your lowest ebb, when you're in your hardest moments, say to yourself, I'm there again. I've done this many times. I'm there again. I'm hurting like hell. I could stop now. This is the bit that I could stop. I know that will become my fondest memory. I mean, the tailwinds, the great views, the rest of it, they all blur into one. But the times where I was absolutely broken, literally broken, fractured elbows, broken teeth, you know, in a mess, and I kept riding my bike, I look back and go, that's career defining. That's life affirming. And here's the last sort of point on how to get yourself out of a hole. Don't kid yourself with nonsense like positive chat. I can't stand this sort of coaching style, which is just like, oh, be happy, high five, you know, be positive, inspirational quotes, all that nonsense. It doesn't work in the real world because you've got to be true to yourself. You've got to call a bad day bad. Realize that this is hell. This is horrible. This is dark. Have a wry smile. Find some dark humor in that, but be honest about it. And I think that's quite helpful. So I always talk about like having a performance mindset, not a positive mindset, because it's not human to be positive all the time. You're going to learn a lot about yourself when you ride ultra endurance. You're going to really find out your inner self and your inner strength. But having a performance mindset is purely about being accountable. What I think, what I do, what I say matters. It's on me. Nobody else can do this. And when you have that, as opposed to like, cheer up, be happy, be positive, which is not particularly helpful when you're in a really dark place, I think it reminds you that actually your actions matter. And are you going to give up on your dream? Are you going to give up on your dream? The simple metric for me is like, be safe. Fundamentally, when you're out there pushing yourself through ultra endurance, be safe. But you got to focus on finishing. You got to focus on, you're going to complete the thing you dreamt of doing.
Yeah.
And along the way, try and have fun.
But that's a really interesting point, isn't it, about the safety? Because there are a lot of people in the ultra community who do put themselves in danger and also do themselves considerable damage long term, you know, with chronic injuries like nerve damage and things. So how do you know at what point to say enough is enough?
That's a hard one to answer. I've got it wrong as well. You know, I've given myself an injury which I thought was just like, oh, that'll take a few days to get over, and it's taken me 6 months. So that does scare you when you realise that you can actually, without falling off your bike, hurt yourself. Did
you know when you were riding that you were potentially doing something bad?
Here's the knock. I knew I hadn't trained appropriately for that event. So I think injury on a big event, and it kind of goes back to this idea about the difference between fitness and conditioning. Most people pick up injuries in ultra endurance because of conditioning. Neck strength is a really important one. So you'll beat yourself up on the turbo, you'll do the miles, you'll be a phenomenally fit rider, fast rider over a short distance, but it's not till you go to the 12 hours plus or multi-day that you'll suddenly realize that you don't have that sort of deep strength. And I mean like proper deep strength, core, arms, back, neck, all that stuff. So when I did myself an injury, I trained for something completely different. But the longest training ride I'd done was like 4 or 5 hours. It was all about intensity and appropriate for the thing I was training for. But then, I flipped that within a couple of months and did a crazy 500-mile non-stop race. So I know why I injured, and during the event, I was in an unbelievable amount of pain. But, it's a judgment call when you're out there. Is this sort of the soreness that you can sleep off, or am I actually doing myself an injury? I have to say, touch wood, I've been doing this since I was a 12-year-old kid. I'm now in my 40s. My worst injuries by far are DIY around the house. The bike's not hurt me that much.
Touch wood. Touch wood, right. I'm increasingly thinking that ultra cycling, there's a lot of pain going on, isn't there? That feels like a theme that we've been talking about. Let's talk about something nice.
But to pick you up on that, is there not a lot of pain in road racing? It's just a different sort of pain.
It's a shorter pain, and it ends, and then you go and have a coffee or a beer and whatever else.
I would hate anyone to watch this video and think that ultra endurance is purely about pain. It's not. There is a wonderful, wonderful space which comes from earning miles, earning big miles. Whether it's gravel, bike packing, road, mountain biking, I don't care what you do. The idea of like pushing yourself. I mean, the reason I got passionate about riding a bike when I was a kid is because it can literally take you around the world. I did it when I was 12 when I crossed Scotland, and that's ended up being my career. So I've never lost that childlike wonder in, I wonder what's over that hill. I wonder how far I could go. And for me, it's not just the numbers, the power, for me it's very much about the people, the cultures, the landscapes, and seeing the world change because you've earned those miles through riding the bike. It's addictive. It's absolutely wonderful. Do you need to struggle and strive? Yeah, but I think the human condition, we wouldn't be athletes if we didn't enjoy the fact that we're striving, we're pushing ourselves. So I would hate people to watch this and go, ultra's not for me because I've got to hurt a little bit. The good points, the elation, the camaraderie, far, far outweighs the suffering. And the human mind has an amazing way of remembering pain.
Which is that it doesn't really.
It doesn't. It doesn't.
Yeah.
So if you can learn to cope with it when you're on the ride, in those rare moments of hardship where you learn something about yourself, the memories are amazing. I did that. I learned something about myself. So get out and ride.
Yeah, and the pride of looking back at what you've done as well.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about something that everyone loves, nutrition, or at least they should love, and particularly in ultra cycling because, food becomes all-encompassing, doesn't it? You are an advocate for real food, aren't you, on long distance?
I've got that sort of golden rule that if your granny doesn't recognise it, don't eat it. Good rule. So avoid ultra-processed foods.
Hummus.
Hummus is great.
Well, I know, but my granny wouldn't recognise hummus.
You're just trying to call me out.
A little bit.
Like
no,
what other foods didn't exist in the 40s that we live on? Right. If it's got to be as natural as possible, because ultimately what you're thinking about is how hard is it for my gut to digest this? Try and keep your food as natural as possible, because all the ultra processed stuff is actually quite hard for your body to break down. And I'm an omnivore, I eat everything, but I don't eat a lot of meat on ultras, because actually if you sit down and eat a steak, that's hard work for your stomach to get through. So just look at it and go, does that look like it's going to take a lot of energy to get the energy out of? And I know so many people, so many people that they're incredibly strong, but they don't complete big rides because of their gut. It's crazy. I mean, some GCN presenters that I could think of, really struggled with this idea. They're super fit, super strong, but when you put yourself under that stress, I'm not a nutritionist, but it feels like a bit of a fight or flight. When you end up in a hole, when you end up really tired, it almost feels like the body's energy is going to surviving. it's going to turning the legs and getting through, and it's sort of thinking, oh, digestion's not quite so important. So as you get to like 12 hours plus, and certainly 24 hours plus, so many people's digestion just slows down, and it feels like the body's just not prioritizing it. So you need to make it as easy as possible for your body to keep working. And most people struggle with their nutrition also because they end up dehydrated. So clearly you need to be really well hydrated. Cheat the calories in, you know, smoothies, blended foods. Just cheat the liquids in through, you know, whatever you can. You know, I'm famous for just chucking what would be a 3-course meal into a smoothie, and down it goes. Anything you can do just to get your hydration in at the same time really helps. When you're doing shorter high intensity stuff, which most riders would still consider ultras, so if you're doing like trying to do a really fast century, or you're doing a 12-hour or a 24-hour, that's where you can flip your nutrition to almost entirely a liquid-based diet. So take, for example, my North Coast 500 record, almost entirely a liquid diet. So that is the opposite from what I just said when you're going for sort of multi-day, multi-week, multi-month, because it's pretty hard when you're eating like sports gels and bars and anything made in a factory like that over long periods. But to be fair, the advances in terms of sports nutrition is incredible in recent years, and so many gels now don't even taste like gels, they taste like food, which is great. But when you're in a more compact position, when you're time trialing and you really are sort of like crunched over on the bike, you know, clearly it's even harder to digest food. So if you're upright on flat bars or gravel bars or road bars, that's fine, and again, you can be as normal as possible about your nutrition. But if you're in a time trial bike but you're doing big distances, that's when you need to think quite seriously about having a more liquid diet. North Coast 500, I was on 110 grams of carbohydrates an hour for 28.5 hours. And that's a liquid diet.
That's impressive. That's impressive digestion, Mark.
That's 17,000 calories in 28.5 hours.
Amazing. Right, you've done a fantastic job so far of genuinely making ultra endurance appealing and accessible. My last question then is, to anyone watching, how would they know whether the event that they're looking at, or the challenge that they're looking at, or the trail they're looking at is something that they can do? What is it that how do you set your own boundaries, or is it limitless? We've already talked about the fact that, you know, anyone can do ultra.
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing about ultra is you're not going to ride anything in training that's anything close to it. I mean, most people, even if they're doing a big training ride, will do 4, 5, 6 hours. That's normally a big road ride or gravel ride. So if you're then going into the ultra world, which is likely multi-day, multi-week, you've not got an easy stepping stone to get there. So what I would encourage you to do is just do everything you can to build a reference point for what you're taking on. So, you know, do some multi-day rides, so you know what it's like waking up and riding when you're tired. You know, and even the admin around your kit, if you're bike packing, that's a big thing. But, you know, ultra races, everyone takes too much.